Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are tuning in from around the world. And yes, today we have a wide selection of countries represented in the chat room, which is actually over at ithemes.com/chat. So I encourage you to head on over there, participate in the discussions, and ask your questions there. We are taking a look at WordPress security vulnerabilities today. This is another one of our iThemes training events. My name is Benjamin Bradley. I'm the professor here at iThemes. You can always follow me at Benjamin Bradley on Twitter. Especially follow iThemes on Twitter if you want to get the latest and greatest of free webinars that we are putting out there. So without further ado, just a little bit of a caveat on this webinar. I am not here to teach you how to be a hacker. But with that being said, we are going to be diving into some of the major security vulnerabilities and holes that hackers try to exploit. And so by looking at some of those things, we can understand why it is important that we take advantage of security best practices that are out there. So why is WordPress security vulnerabilities important to talk about? And I couldn't come up with a better answer than simply 25%. 25% of all sites on the entire internet are powered by WordPress. And then we can even look at any site, any site on the internet that has a content management system running it. That makes 65% of all those content managements. You get this. So 25%, you can go take a look at the latest stats from Matt Mullenweg at the WordCamp US. You can also take a look at any of the internet sites that track statistics. They all, across the board, 25%, and 25% is a low number. So I went with the lowest number that I was able to find. So if 25%, and if we understand that, it becomes a major target because it's open source code. WordPress is open source, so everybody can see the source code. They can dig through the code. They can look and see if they can find a vulnerability. And then once they find a vulnerability, they know they can now try to exploit 25% of the entire internet. Now, the other reason why it's important to talk about security vulnerabilities is that WordPress is really easy to set up. How many of you struggled to set up WordPress? I mean, I would venture to say that a large majority of people, for the first time ever doing WordPress, they clicked a button and it was done. They used one of those one-click installs, or maybe they even went to the whole process of uploading WordPress, the code, and they found that all they had to do was fill out one page and they were done. Well, because it is so easy to set up, not everyone is careful, thorough, or security conscious with their site. And so therefore, people who find it so easy to set up may not realize that just by setting it up, there are other things that they need to keep in mind. So therefore, vulnerabilities are everywhere. Because 25% of the internet, it's a huge target. It's open source. Everybody can see it. And most people with WordPress are not careful about their WordPress sites. So what does that mean? That means in the deep, dark, nefarious world, there are groups constantly looking for vulnerabilities in WordPress to exploit. Now, yes, this may not be a normal hacker group, but no, this is not a self-portrait. But let's pull back from this hacker who's trying to take over the internet concept, and whether this next slide is a representation of your perception of the internet or your website, or it might even be the perception of your client. How many of you have had a client, or maybe yourself, you're thinking, but I want a 100% secure website? Well, guess what? You can deliver. If you simply set up WordPress on a computer that nobody can touch and nothing interacts with it. And so therefore, you get the most secure WordPress website. Forget WordPress. You get the most secure website, but it becomes the hardest to use because nobody can access it. The truth is, as some of you have already said in the chat room, and if you're just logging in, it's at ithemes.com/chat. The truth about internet security is the moment you are connected, there is the possibility of security breaches. So this is just an important thing, and why we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the vulnerabilities. Now, this is where fear begins. I'm about ready to lift the hood up and show you where most of the attacks occur. And we'll even talk about a number of them and how it happens. To date, there are 3,972 known WordPress vulnerabilities. That means those hackers, those people in those dungeons with computer screens, they already have a log of 3,972 known ways of hacking WordPress. Now, these stats come from wpscan.org, which it runs a black box server that only runs WordPress, and it's simply there to monitor security vulnerabilities. Now, let me put your mind at ease just a little bit. This is for all versions of WordPress. So this is going back to the initial WordPress releases. Slides will be available after this event. So if there are 3,972 known WordPress vulnerabilities, more than half of them come from WordPress plugins. 37% of them are from core WordPress. Now, that is a little bit of a misnomer, I think. As I was looking through their statistics, this is going all the way back to WordPress 0.7. %, come from WordPress themes. So themes are not as big of an issue as plugins and core WordPress. Now we'll talk about that and the reason why here in just a moment. Okay, so if we know that there are all these vulnerabilities out there, these next few steps are really my attempt to give you all the knowledge so that you don't have to live in fear that there's all these vulnerabilities out there. So I've got another number for you. Of all of these 3,972 vulnerabilities, 39% of them are cross-site scripting, XSS. How many of you have heard of cross-site scriptings? But maybe you don't know exactly what that means. Because I'll actually be going through and telling you what many of these vulnerability attack vectors actually mean. So, cross-site scripting is basically adding client-side scripts, so that would be like JavaScript, into a web page that fires off or does something when we have other people visiting our website. all of these statistics, just so you know, come from WP Scan, as well as the links to, and I'll just show you, there is a vulnerability database that is run by WordPress and a number of other people. So if you want to jump in on any of those stats, you can dive in there. Okay, so cross-site scripting. Most of the time it's used to bypass access controls and its other what we consider impersonation exploits. Now, a basic example might be I'm able to, if I find a vulnerability and I can place one of my scripts on your WordPress site, it would allow me to maybe even listen in on a conversation when one of your users goes to log into their site. So by me listening in, or watching what occurs, or bringing in another script that will impersonate the user who's logging in, all of a sudden I now have control of their account. Now, where this might get really dangerous is if you have a shopping site. And what if your shopping site, stores a credit card? Amazon. What if somebody had a cross-site scripting injected into Amazon.com because your credit card information is probably saved with Amazon.com, and they learn how to log in as you? Then they can go purchase something. Now, I also found, and this is on Wikipedia, and it links off to the statistic page if you want to follow through on that. 84% of all security vulnerabilities on the entire internet are cross-site scripting. That actually speaks highly to WordPress. Why? If 84% of all the attacks are cross-site scripting, if we look at just WordPress sites, it's less than 40%. So WordPress itself has great cross-site scripting preventions. Most of the time when this occurs, it's because there is some bad code or something that has happened with a plugin that is allowing this type of client-side script to run on your WordPress site. So, this is probably of greater interest to many of you. These are the other known attack vectors against WordPress. 15% of all attack vectors of those 3,972 vulnerabilities were SQL injections. These are database injections. These are things that they have found a line in your code that accepts an SQL statement. Because remember, WordPress is nothing more than a pretty face on a database. It's PHP. WordPress is PHP, which is the communication tool to our database. So everything else about WordPress is simply the beautification of a PHP form that inserts and pulls stuff out of a database. So if somebody finds that they have the ability to execute or run a database command, an SQL, it's a query language. If they can run that, they could change somebody's password. They could simply say, select the username or update the username that has the ID 1 with this password. Or they could find other things that could happen. So that is why 15% of this. 11% of the attack vectors are upload exploitations. Many times this is the most common one with WordPress is your permissions in your upload folder. Now remember, before we dive off, I want to make sure everybody knows where I'm going with this. Remember, WordPress is open source. Everybody in the world knows, if they want to look for it, what happens when something gets uploaded. We all know that when WordPress uploads something through a form field, it goes into the WP-contents folder, inside the uploads folder, inside the 2016, inside the 01. Now, you may have changed the directory structure of your upload, but by default, I can probably guess where, if I'm uploading something like a submission, let's say your website, your WordPress website is doing an essay contest, and on your essay contest, you're allowing the students to upload a document as part of your form field. Well, anybody who knows WordPress knows where that document is going to be saved by default. Now, if you've changed the default things, it's going to take a little bit more work for me to find that. But now imagine you forgot to protect or restrict the certain types of files that you can upload. Well, now, if all of a sudden I'm able to upload my own PHP file, I know where it lives. I know it's now in the WP contents /uploads /2016 /01 for January. If that's where it is, I can go visit that site directly. And if I have not protected my WordPress site from running scripts from inside the uploads folder, all of a sudden that person can have complete control of your entire site, your entire server, simply by uploading a file. Cross-site, 7% cross-site request forgeries. This one, it's a little bit more unusual, but normally a site would have to be really attacked or taken control of, because this would allow me to force already logged in users, actual legitimate users, to perform actions they didn't actually mean to do. I mean, there's nothing worse than if it's the first time you're ever trying to investigate a security hack of WordPress, and you say, well, look, I see that this user here named Bob, everything was happening from his account. Well, it might not actually be his account. It might be a cross-site request forgery that's forcing that logged-in user, when they go to click one thing, something else is happening. Then you've got multiple attack vectors, like a combination of multiple things occurring at the same time, hoping to overwhelm your system. I'm going to actually give you and walk you through an example of these local file inclusion, remote file inclusion. These are really tricky hacks, and they come about, and the vulnerabilities come about because of poor coders who are submitting their plugins or their themes out to the public, and they don't really understand security. And I'm actually going to demonstrate a hack here in just a moment on why this is just a disastrous thing, and why we'll have to deal with trust issues here in just a moment. Yeah, we're all going to have to go to counseling after this. 2% authentication bypass. They have found a way to not have to log in because a plugin, and normally this is a plugin, it sometimes is a theme, has disregarded security practices in WordPress and allowed somebody to visit a page they shouldn't visit. We've all seen those plugins that all of a sudden we get a call from a client saying, you know what, I can actually visit the settings page of this plugin, yet I'm not logged in. Or maybe we haven't gotten that. If you haven't gotten that, great. You're good. But there are ways that people forget to check and see if a person is logged in order to be able to take care of that. FPD. How many of you remember the days where every single time when you made your HTML website, you had to write the entire URL structure into every single one of your images, your links, anytime you were referencing something, there was no such thing as a relative link. Relative links, it took a year or two before that happened. Well, it's also happening with WordPress, a poorly constructed plugin that hard codes in a URL structure now gives the full path disclosure that anybody who wants to know, and this is the full path on the server. So now I can simply look at the URL structure and I can figure out how your entire server is laid out by, are you coming in through the if I know the type of structure, I can probably say, okay, well, now I know where your actual server passwords are stored based on whether the file structure is similar to a Ubuntu server or whether it is similar to a CentOS server, whether it is similar to a Microsoft server. I can figure out when these full path disclosures happen, and I can, as the hacker, begin to narrow down the structure of your entire server without really even visiting your website. So I can make my plan of attack. Some of these others are more prevalent in non-WordPress sites, but we still see, 1% is of the 3,972 is still 30 to 40 attacks. So we have an XXE, which stands for XML Eternal Entity Attack. This is what happens when, like a form submission, like an XML file that contains data that is descriptive of information, gets intercepted, and then I modify that, and then it gets pushed onto the receiver. So I have essentially modified the XML file to, a quick example. This is not actually how it happens, but if I were to go to an ATM machine and I were going to do a deposit, and I deposit $200 in the ATM is going to say to my account, let's just say it logs the thing through an XML file and sends that the amount deposited is 200, and it sends it on. If I could do an XXE attack on an ATM, and I don't think it's possible unless you open it up and actually access the ATM, I would intercept that deposit slip and switch the 200 with 20,000. And now my account would think, because it's the exact same XML file, it doesn't know that something got changed on the way. So that's what this type of XXE attack is. Now, there's a denial of service. That just means your server gets flooded, and it can cause WordPress to do weird things if it doesn't have it causes WordPress to do weird things if it doesn't have the resources to do things like cron jobs or things actually to accomplish itself. Now, I told you I was going to walk you through this because this is, I hope, not going to scare some of you from learning how to code yourself. So, file inclusion vulnerability. It's one of the more interesting ones to deal with. If I am a hacker and I know that there might be a vulnerability, I could access your entire server just by visiting a URL. And I'm going to walk you through this. Again, this is not teaching you how to be a hacker. I'm giving you kind of vague things just so that everybody doesn't go out and hack WordPress websites. So I hope everybody realizes that anytime there is a question mark in a URL, that is information that is being passed to the server, that a server can use that stuff to repopulate PHP forms, to perform tasks, and any type of code. So for example, this is an innocuous code that I have seen before, not this exact one, but I have seen these type of codes in themes and plugins settings area. So what this is simply saying, even if you don't know PHP, I can explain this to you. There's simply an if statement. And it's saying if the get and this $_get would be referencing the URL structure. So it's saying, get me the parameter, and this is color is the parameter. So get me the color parameter if it's set. And by set, meaning, is there an equal sign with some type of variable here? If it is set, guess what we're doing? We're going to include a PHP file that has the name here. Now, ignore this here. We're going to go back and forth between this. So this would be what we are expecting. Now, where would this come from? Maybe in your settings field of your plugin or your theme, you are saying choose the color and the design structure for your widget. And you select the color blue. So in the form, it is passing to, and the vulnerability is not a file. It's like the name of the plugin file. So it's passing information through the URL that color equals blue. Well, the code is simply saying somewhere in your plugin file is a file that's called color.php. So somewhere in your theme or plugin is a blue.php. So that's logical. But once somebody finds out that you have PHP code that is allowing file inclusion, did you know that almost every server, Linux server out there, stores password files, and it might be some variation of 00, 01, 02 or something. They're all stored in the folder etc password. So what I've just done is, if this is a vulnerability of using file inclusion, I could print out on the screen your server passwords. Which means I have now just completely bypassed your WordPress site, and I now control your server. Because I now know how to log in to your server. Maybe I don't want to find that. Maybe I want to include another file, because that's what file inclusion is doing. We're changing what is expected in a parameter with something else that would upload either a local file, or there's even something called remote file inclusion. Yeah, many of these are encrypted, but encryptions can be cracked. Now, this is just a quick example. I could probably go find other things on your server. I could include other things. But once I'm able to see that I can include files simply by modifying your parameter in your URL. Doesn't have to be just passwords. It could be any number of things. And again, it starts off as something that we think, oh, that's a great idea of, wouldn't it be nice if I had a drop-down box in my form settings that allows me to choose the color of my forms, of my widget. Simply setting up options can sometimes, if you don't know what you're doing, open up somebody to completely take your site. So, is it really that bad? Can I essentially hack any WordPress website out there? No, because we need to talk about trust. Trust is a huge part in not only open source, but choosing what to put on your website. Let's go back a few years. And we're going to talk about vulnerabilities in regular computers. In the 90s, does anybody know what the number one attack vector into people's personal computers were? Email was one, but it was not, and Windows, no. The number one attack vector, which was able to completely control during the early 90s, was wallpaper software. How many of you had those wallpaper softwares where, oh, look, it's so wonderful, you get a free new wallpaper every day? And then it just started jamming your computer with tons of files. I think that I was reading, it was a long time ago, but I remember reading about a group that cleaned people's computers. Many of them got so slow but when they brought them into the workshop, and they deleted and removed all those wallpaper apps, programs. Like they got back over half of the storage space on those computers. So it comes back to trust. Back then, we had to trust, who are we, or who wrote this program? How shall we trust that this is okay? And so there were all these companies out there that started verifying that this application is virus-free or Trojan-free, and so we could download there. So there was a trust being built. We must be careful with anything dealing with WordPress. It's all about trust. If you are downloading a WordPress theme from any place other than the WordPress theme repository, you must ask yourself, do I trust these people? And same thing, do you trust iThemes? And add an iThemes theme. Do you trust, Woo themes and upload Woo stuff? And I'll be honest, I know there are going to be people here on the call who love to find places that, oh, it's GPL. We get to give away these other premium plugins and themes. So I ask you, do you trust people that are just grabbing themes and plugins from all these different themes and plugins stores and putting them up for free? How do you know if somebody else already wants to try to give everything away and maybe charge you for it? How do you know that they haven't put a file on there? Because many of them do. It's a tiny little encryption. Maybe it's getting you to download, or they're logging something, or they're finding out more information about who you are or your site. Trust is a huge part of security. So when we talk about trust, I'm hoping to give you some answers of what you can do. Oh, and just to put this out there, I believe it was Security or something who did a survey probably about a year ago of all the WordPress-related themes or plugins that were on BitTorrent, or the different torrent downloads, and they found that 82% of all the ones that they were able to connect to had viruses or Trojan horses on them. except you wouldn't know, thinking I'm just getting this premium theme for free. So what can you do? Step 1, or the first step. Even with all those security issues out there and all those vulnerabilities that exist, it doesn't matter what type of, I've locked down my server, I've done all this security stuff. If you have a weak login, it's over before you begin. Passwords are the number one thing you can walk away from this webinar fixing that will actually make a difference. I'm going to ask this question. You don't have to answer it in the chat room. How many of you have a different password for every single one of the sites that you visit on the entire internet, and each of those passwords have a capital letter, a lowercase letter, a number, and a symbol? If you can answer yes to that, A, you're probably already using a password manager, and congratulations, you have done the number one thing you can do. Now, what tends to happen, and yeah, it doesn't matter whether you use 1Password, LastPass, Dashlane. I love Dashlane, but any of those password managers will help you solve this problem. Now, I'm going to paint a picture here, and I know some of you, if you're like me, this is how I used to be. I'm a person, I like repetition and patterns. That's just who I am. That's how my brain works. I work inside patterns. And so therefore, when I come across or am given a really strong password, it becomes a pattern for me. And I start thinking to myself, this is an extremely strong password. It may be like 18, 26 characters. It's just all over the place. There's no actual words, but it becomes a pattern for my hands to type. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is a super strong password. It is perfectly fine. And so I start using that super strong password for all different sites. Here's where the problem is. Now, what if I use that super strong password on this sports statistics website that does a bad job at security and stored the passwords and emails in plain text? Well, now somebody can now use my username, my email, and password and go visit a bazillion different websites that they have on their bot using my email and my super strong password, and they can get into all my sites. So just because you have a super strong password does not mean you use it on every one of your sites. When Adobe released a few years ago the top list of passwords, we literally found out that it was like 4.6 million people on their Adobe Creative Suite accounts use the password. Then it was like 1.2 million people used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's ridiculous. That's where this comes from. This is the Adobe leaked password, the list of the top 100 passwords. So a site that you'd think people would want to protect, they're not using anything strong. So remove weak logins. Do your passwords, because the way the attack vector into WordPress is through WordPress's login screen. By default, people can try infinite number of attempts to log into a WordPress site using default WordPress. So therefore, if I figure out what your username is, I could simply try the passwords until I'm blue in the face and nothing will happen. That's called brute force. And no, I am not talking about the 80s hair band, also by the name of brute force. We are talking about the attacks directly against the WordPress login form. And yes, that was the band's name, brute force. I think we need to get brute force to play at the next WordCamp. And maybe then WordPress core developers will change the WordPress login code. So, if we eliminate the number of times people can try a WordPress login before failing, we're able to lock down our WordPress site. Pretty much any, or sorry, I'm not going to say any because I know that there are some security plugins that don't do this. If you have a security plugin that protects your login screen from brute force logins, that is a great thing to add. iTheme Security Pro, or even the free one, iTheme Security, goes a step beyond this. And it eliminates the ability for anybody to log in using the username admin. Why? Because for many years, admin was the default administrator account with WordPress. And so the only reason somebody should be logging into WordPress using the username admin is because they're trying to do nefarious things with your website. So therefore, as iTheme Security plugin does, if somebody types in admin, it immediately locks out their IP address. And Javier, you are jumping one step ahead of me on the weak logins, and that's two-factor authentication. I love two-factor authentication. I use it. My banks have two-factor authentication. A lot of my trading, my portfolios, they have two-factor authentication. Anything that deals with things that are important to me, I have locked behind two-factor authentication. For the simple reason is I know at one point or another somebody is going to be access my passwords. Something is going to happen. But with two-factor authentication, I have an expiring one-time use extra password that is generated, auto-generated for me. And the moment I use that, it expires, and now we're done. I tend to use Authy because Authy will also handle Google Authenticator, and it works great across all my devices. There's tons of different two-factor authentication systems. Now, iTheme Security Pro, and I'm going to show you this at the end if we have time, because it takes two-factor to the next level, because especially if you're dealing with clients who are not at this level, where they're not saying, I'm going to carry around a two-factor authentication device or my cell phone to always try and log in. There are other ways that we can provide two-factor authentication. And I'll briefly show you that. Okay, so that's all the weak logins. Prevent malware. Malware is what is causing the cross-site scripting. That we have something on our site that is spreading and doing something malicious. You should be scanning on periodic basis your website to make sure that you are malware free. And there are any number of ways to do it. Just make sure that you are doing this. Vulnerable servers. How many of you have ever heard the concept of herd mentality or the herd inoculation? That you want to make sure that as many people in your group are doing the right thing, are being inoculated against something, because if you're all protected, you're actually protecting those that don't get inoculated. The idea is, if you have a large herd of cattle and you set a day aside that you are going to herd them all in and inoculate them, give them some type of a protection against something else, some disease, you don't actually have to inoculate the entire group. Because what you can do is you inoculate, I think the 85% is the level that some farmers or ranchers go for. The herd mentality will be able to protect those that did not get it. And so where this is bad, how many of you are on a shared hosting account, a shared server, or even a virtual private server? Now, for those of you who are on dedicated server, this is not really your issue. So let's say you've got a bunch of people on HostGator. Let's take a look at one server, like this one little blade here. Let's say it would have 800 WordPress websites on this one little blade. Well, if you are the only one who's upgrading your WordPress website, that leaves 799 other WordPress websites that are not updating that now are vulnerable. And as I said, if they can get access to the server through a vulnerable website, it doesn't matter that your site was perfectly updated and protected. They have access to the server and they can still mess up your website. Now, VPSs, it depends on how it's set up. But the idea is not so much worry about where you're hosting, unless you're on a site that has tons of WordPress websites that are just being used for spam and they're never updated, and the average one is version 2.0. Now remember, you can always go look on what are other websites that are on the IP address that I'm on. You can look up DNS information and say what other domain names go to this IP address, because most shared hosting uses the same IP address. And then you can see, hey, are these other WordPress websites, they're not being updated? Well, maybe it's time for you to move hosting companies. So be careful of vulnerable servers. Proper permissions. We're going to move through this a little bit faster, this section. Just making sure that people can't run uploaded programs in your uploads folder. Make sure people can't actually access certain areas. iTheme Security, as well as a bunch of other security plugins, will be able to look and give you kind of a green light, red light, whether or not your permissions are set correctly on your website. And I'll leave this as my number 5. You got to set up WordPress correctly. That means you need to have the real salt keys, not some made-up salt keys in your WP config file. You need to make sure that you are correctly putting the permissions in, that you are correctly locking down WordPress, requiring strong passwords. Because if you don't set up and work with WordPress the right way, you could lose, just like this picture, half your house just gone without you even realizing. Okay, so there's lots of stuff that needs action here. But what I want to encourage you is you're not alone. Remember how we went all the way back and talked about WordPress powering 25% of the entire internet? That means there's also a lot of developers that are supporting WordPress. And that is collaboration. There's a collective power of lots and lots of skilled developers working to make WordPress more secure every single day. And hopefully you realized by now, if you've been in the WordPress world, the ecosystem, that a majority of all the commits or things that are added to the code for every update are bug fixes and security fixes, not features. The majority of all the stuff that you do when you hit update are security related. So WordPress actually has, and whoops, let me bring this page over. WordPress actually has a page in the codex. And what's amazing is most people don't even know that this exists, this page. Here's all these different things that you can do to harden your WordPress installation. It's just all laid out there. So learn that page. Be familiar with that page. And if we have time here in just a moment, I want to show you one or two things with iTheme Security. But we have an amazing update coming for iTheme Security. I just wanted to let you know about that we're deep in the testing of it, and we can't wait to unveil it for you. But I've got a side note, and we need to discuss this. Because there are many people out there selling security when really what they're doing is obscurity. The difference here, and I'll draw you an illustration or create you an illustration. There are plugins out there that, and iTheme Security used to do this, but it's now not really a major focus of it, the security, because it's not. It's obscurity. Oh, you know what? We're just going to move the login page to a different location, and that's security. No, actually what that means is, okay, I've got a house. You've got a house. I'm going to move the front door to the side. And, oh, guess what? I don't need to lock my front door anymore because it's now on the side. And anybody driving down the street, they see that I don't have a door, so they're not going to even try. That's what obscurity is. You're simply hiding something, but you haven't done anything. Now, here's the other thing. Let's say we move the front door to the side and lock it. Guess what? Now we're using security with obscurity. And that can be a good thing. But don't rely on obscurity as your security method. Things like, oh, you know what? Oh, we just need to change the database table. We need to change the admin user. We need to make sure that this is... Those are obscurity things. They can be used alongside security, like strong passwords, two-factor authentication, brute force protection. All those type of things can be used alongside to handle this. So let's get back to where we started. There are 3,972 known WordPress vulnerabilities. And as I told you just recently, on the last slide, I think, that a majority of all updates that happen with WordPress, with plugins, with themes are bug and security fixes. Which means this should be your life. Update all the things. Never, ever just sit there and, you know what? I don't know if I want to update. Maybe I want to hold off on that WordPress update to see if anything goes wrong. Your mantra should be, I've got a good backup. It doesn't matter if something goes wrong because I can always, within a click of a button, restore my backup. So therefore, I'm going to update all the things. The best way that you can make sure that these vulnerabilities, these 3,972 known WordPress vulnerabilities, don't affect you is to update all the things. And that was a look at WordPress security vulnerabilities. I did want to let you know that we are in our 8th anniversary party celebration right now. And you can actually see on the side of the chat room there is a coupon for 35% off that you can use to celebrate our 35th anniversary, our 8th anniversary of 35%. Now, Tony, if you know me and been on the webinars, I'm not a sales pitch guy. But I wanted to show you that, the 35% off, because I'm about ready to show you the one aspect of two-factor authentication that iThemes Security Pro provides. Yes, you can use the time-based one-time password. That's that Authy, Google Authenticator, twofer, free one-time password authentication system. That's what this is, where it will generate so each user could have their own one password. But we can also open up the ability to have a two-factor, which is an email. So for your email account, if you have an email account that is associated with your user account at WordPress, if you enable this way and the user sets up their email, when they go to log in and they go to that username, the login page, they enter their username, they enter their password, and then your WordPress site will send their email a code. And on the next page on WordPress, during their login, they can enter that code. So it gives a non-technical person the ability to also participate in this two-factor authentication, and we go even further. Backup verification codes. So when somebody goes to set up their account and turn on two-factor authentication, if they choose the backup verification codes, they can get a printout of 5 to 10 codes. And they can put those codes, like the secretary's desk where it is duct taped or it is, taped to the side of the monitor. But those are single-time use. Once one of those codes is used, it's gone. You can't use it anymore. So I just wanted to highlight this one factor, one area of iThemes Security Pro, and that's the two-factor authentication. It can do all these other things, but I only wanted to take time out of this to show you that two-factor authentication doesn't have to be difficult, but it is something that you should look at putting into your own site. So I hope you've enjoyed this little dive into some of the vulnerabilities that are out there, how people exploit things, how bad it is, and what you can do for your own sites. And hopefully this gives you the courage to realize that you've made the right choice moving forward with WordPress. Yes, this webinar was recorded and will be available for replay. I encourage you to follow along with the iThemes Twitter account at iThemes, as well as the blog at ithemes.com/blog. And that's where you'll be able to find the replay. So we are right at the 1 hour mark. So I want to thank everybody for joining with me. If you're looking at upgrading or renewing your account or just joining us for the first time, don't forget it is our 8th anniversary and there is a 35% off coupon sitting to the right of the chat room. That was at ithemes.com/chat. Till next time, I hope you have a great rest of the day.